and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the very important policy of India's foreign policy, that is strategic autonomy, the related challenges and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the importance of the constitutional provisions of the 6th schedule, its successes, limitations and the way forward. Then in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition, so stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to strategic autonomy, India's balancing act in a multipolar world. Lord Palmerston once said that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only interests are permanent, interests are eternal. Now this has been best reflected in the kind of stance taken by the Indian foreign policy in the last few years. And even our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has said this many a times, that what matters most for India or what is supreme for India is the national interest. Now this particular position in the overall national foreign policy architecture is termed as the position of strategic autonomy, where we take our decisions independently and we are not bound by or we are not influenced by the other countries or by the position of other countries. For example, let's take the case of Russia-Ukraine war, or let's take the case of Israel-Iran conflict. We did not choose a particular side. That is what in this particular article we have this particular column written by Priyam Gandhi Modi, which says that India's foreign policy stance, that is this particular policy of strategic autonomy, it is a sign of its growing stature. That is, India speaks when it matters the most, acts when it counts, and leads when it is required to. So what we are going to do today is we'll see what this particular position of strategic autonomy is all about, how this particular position has evolved over the years, what are the challenges and what should be the way forward, right? And it's going to be a very, very important discussion with respect to GS2 international relations. Now, as I told you, if we were to define what is strategic autonomy, it is basically the ability of a particular country to act in an independent manner, not to be bound by the influence of the other countries, right? So it's the ability of a state to pursue its own national interest and its preferred foreign policy choices without being constrained by the views of the other countries. Now, when we talk about India, in India's construct, it is primarily manifested in 2 aspects. The very first aspect is with respect to territorial integrity. When we talk about securing our territorial integrity. The second aspect is with respect to sovereignty, both internal as well as external. This is what you have to keep in mind. Now, what is the primary interest that we are so inclined or we are so attached to this concept of strategic autonomy, to this aspect of non-interference? See, we were ruled by the Britishers, and Britishers exploited India in the very extent possible in all the domains. So after the independence, we had the political leaders at that particular time. They thought that for India, what really matters the most is having a policy of its own, acting in an independent manner. There should not be a country guiding us. There cannot be any intervention of any sort. And that's the reason we give a lot of importance to this position of strategic autonomy. Now, how this particular principle of strategic autonomy has evolved with changing time. See, in order to understand that, we'll have to first understand a very important concept in international relations, and that is world order. You must have heard about this particular word, been familiar with this particular word. That is world order. See, what is world order? It basically signifies the distribution of power and authority among different countries, international organizations around the world. It speaks about the arrangement of power and authority at a particular moment of time in different countries and institutions around the world. Now, when we talk about the power and authority, this is a dynamic concept. It has kept on changing. Now, if you just were to look at this particular infographic, what you'll see is that in the old times, we had the Dutch who had their naval superiority and they were basically spearheading or the dominant power in the world. Then this position was taken by the Britishers when British colonized most of the parts of the world, right, including India. Slowly after the end of Second World War, what we found was the preponderant or the rise of US, right, till 2001 when we witnessed the World Trade Center incident, right? And since 2001, what we have been witnessing, what happened in 2001 was another incident when China joined the World Trade Organization, that too on the insistence of the US. And slowly what we are witnessing now is the aggressive rise of China. That is what the kind of the construct of world order is all about, right? Now, from the perspective of India's foreign policy, if we look at this particular aspect of world order from the perspective, from the lens of Indian foreign policy, we will better understand how this position of strategic autonomy has evolved. Now, let's talk about the very first phase. When we talk about the non-alignment from 1947 at the time of independence till 1961, what you have to understand is, look at the world order. The world is basically bipolar in nature at this particular moment of time. And we have the one power bloc being led by the US and the other led by the erstwhile USSR. Now, it was that time that India chose to remain non-aligned. It did not choose any of these power bloc, right? And it was the institutionalization of the non-aligned movement in the 1961 that we witnessed one of the most transformational events, right? Next aspect is that of Panchsheel policy. It was the initiative of Pandit Nehru, where he tried to emphasize upon the kind of interaction we are going to have with the other countries, especially in the construct of our relations with China. And we came up with the Panchsheel policy, which talked about mutual coexistence, non-aggression, non-interference in each other matters, right? Then we have the preservation of autonomy. What you have to understand is, after India got its independence and we suffered a lot of the tragedies with respect to the partition. So what was most important for India and the political leaders at that particular point of time was the consolidation of the territory, making sure that there is preservation of the territorial integrity. And therefore, this particular stance of strategic autonomy was very important, right? So as to take decisions on its own merit, not to be influenced by the others. Then the second phase was that of the realism, which started from 62 till 71. 62, we had the Indo-Sinic War, right? Indo-China War, which led to the defeat of India. And therefore, there was some aspect of realism, which was dawned in the Indian foreign policy, right? And we've made a lot of pragmatic choices. For example, it was in the year of 1964 that India came with a defense partnership with the US, right? It was a more pragmatic choice, practical choice. Then let's talk about the third phase, that was of regional assertion, especially starting from 1971. Now, see, again, understand, you will have to look at this particular phase from the lens of India's close association with the USSR. And you must be aware that there was a tilt towards the USSR in the form of the signing of Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation, right? Now, it must not be seen as a kind of an alignment, but it was definitely a tilt, right? And ultimately, we had the creation of Bangladesh through the Liberation War, right? And what you must also understand is, at that particular time, looking at the kind of security situation, India went with a decision to become a nuclear power. And it was in the 1974 test, what we call as the Operation Smiling Buddha, that India became a nuclear power. And after this particular test, we had the Western countries, primarily the US, imposing a lot of sanctions on India, right? Also, you must understand that this was the phase of peacekeeping operations. You must be aware of the India peacekeeping forces. So we sent our forces in Sri Lanka to control the situation there, right? So it was obviously a pragmatic choice, right? And it was a manifestation of the regional assertion. Now, understand that since India was tilting towards the USSR, there was a counter development. There was a development of a particular axis, and that was the US-China-Pakistan axis, in order to deter India-Soviet friendship, in order to deter this particular partnership, right? Now, when we talk about the fourth phase, starting especially from the 1990s, you must understand that this was a phase of economic reforms. So we basically opened our gates for different countries around the world. Now understand, this particular reforms were taken primarily because India suffered from the balance of payment crisis, and there was a kind of a pressure, especially from the US, to open our economy, and we initiated reform measures like the LPG reforms, what we call as the liberalization, privatization and globalization measures. Now this not only interacted or increased our interactions with the US in different domains, be it technology, be it economic, be it business, but also we had greater interactions with different countries around the world. For example, greater defense partnership with Russia, right? So we saw a kind of a multi-alignment. We saw greater interactions with the East Asian economies, right? Next phase, what we have is the fifth phase, which continues till this particular day, right? India's strategic autonomy in a multipolar world. Now you have to understand, Especially after 2001, what we are witnessing is the aggressive rise of China and the growth of different poles around the world, what we call as a multipolar world. It's no longer a bipolar, it's a multipolar world. We have different countries around the world. For example, let's say Germany, Japan, we have Russia, different poles, right? So again, in this particular construct, we have again started to having more dependence upon this particular aspect of strategic autonomy. There has been a shift from a P2 mindset. What is P2? The permanent two. We are not just looking at either US or China. We are interacting with different countries around the world. We are interacting with Germany, we are interacting with Japan. When we talk about the technology aspect, we are basically emerging as a voice of global South, taking or basically advocating the interest of the least developed countries in different forums around the world. So there has been a shift. Next, free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Now, again understand, and we even discussed this earlier, that there has been a power transition from the Atlantic towards the Indo-Pacific. And in the Indo-Pacific construct, we have the Indian Ocean region, which is the most important. And in the Indian Ocean region, it is the geographical entity of India, which is the most important player. So therefore, what we are trying to do is we are trying to emerge as a regional leader. And therefore, we are trying to give importance to this particular construct of Indo-Pacific, right? Then we are also following this particular aspect of balancing diplomacy. That is, on one hand, we are having close interactions with the US, be it defense, be it technology, be it space exploration. On the other hand, we are also having close partnerships with Russia. Or let's say we are having close partnerships with Israel, be it defense, be it agriculture. Also, when it comes to connectivity, we are also interacting with Iran. So there's a kind of balancing diplomacy which is taking place. Also, we are having the dehyphenation. That is, we are looking at the country on its own merit. When we look at Israel and Iran, we are not basically talking about the conflicts they are having. We are looking about the kind of interactions which India has with Israel on its own merit and India has with Iran on its own merit. That is, we are having a dehyphenated policy, which especially India talks when we talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. That is, we have our interaction on its own merit, be it with Israel or be it with Palestine. Next is issue-based cooperation. One of the most important aspects of strategic autonomy, what you have to understand is the issue-based cooperation. That is, when we talk about technological cooperation or when we talk about greater investments, let's talk about UAE or Australia. We have signed trade partnerships with these countries, right? Why? Because we are focusing upon specific issues. Or let's say cybersecurity, or let's say emerging technologies. You must be aware of ISET, Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies with US. So it is a kind of issue-based cooperation we are having in different domains with different countries around the world. Then we have intensification of cooperation with middle powers. Again, very, very important. Let's talk about our interaction with South Korea or Japan or Germany. These are technological powerhouses and we are interacting with them. Most of the automobile companies, best of the automobile companies are located in these countries around the world. Japan is a technological powerhouse. So we are interacting more so that we can have more of investments and India can then emerge as a self-reliant country. Critical defense deal. Now this is again very, very important. You must be aware that we are having a very close partnership with the US. We have signed a 4 foundational agreement when we talk about the LEMOA, Logistic Exchange Memorandum of Understanding, right? Or when we talk about COMCASA, Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement, or when we talk about GSOMIA, General Security of Military Information Agreement, right? Or when we talk about BECA, Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. These are 4 foundational agreements which India has signed with the US. And this makes a very close partner of India with that of the US. But you must, and see, we have also bought a lot of these defense platforms. Let's talk about C-17 Globemaster or C-130J Super Hercules or attack helicopters, Apache attack helicopters. So we have had close partnerships with the US. It designated India as a major defense partner in the year 2016, right? But on the other hand, what we see is that we are also having close defense partnerships with Russia. Talk about S-400 missile defense system. And we saw its utility in the recent Operation Sindoor, right? So again, what we have to understand is that we are having critical, very sophisticated defense deal with those countries who are often competing with each other or having animosity with each other. Let's talk about US or Russia. That is what the importance of strategic autonomy is. Think in that perspective. Then let's talk about the 2+2 dialogue. Very, very important aspect. See, when we are talking about 2+2, what we are talking is, we are talking about the interaction between our Minister for External Affairs, what we call as the Foreign Minister, and the Defense Minister with their counterparts of different countries. So we have come with this 2+2 partnership with different countries, with US, with Australia, also with Russia, right? So they are competing countries, but still we are having close partnerships so that we can have a more of diplomatic coordination, defense coordination, strategic coordination, right? Military logistics agreement, I already told you that we signed LEMOA with US, and we also signed RELOS with Russia, right? Or let's take the case of the logistics agreement with France or Singapore. So this tells about the evolving nature of India's foreign policy. Pulling out of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now you have to understand, this was a China-led initiative in the whole Indo-Pacific. Why did we come out of that was primarily because we had our own concerns with respect to the domestic manufacturing, with respect to the farmers. And we did not want to be a part of a particular initiative which was led by China. Instead, what we have chosen is a partnership which is IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Now, this is not a trade agreement, what you have to understand. It's just a partnership agreement. But again, understand, it is quite different and it's a kind of a counter to RCEP, right? Next aspect is use of hard power. Again, very, very important. What do we mean by strategic autonomy? How do we manifest that? By taking strong instances. Previously, we had the operation, we had the surgical strikes when we talk about Myanmar or when we talk about Balakot. And recently, what we saw was the stance taken by India in the Operation Sindhu, where we launched very effective retaliatory strikes. So this speaks about the hard power approach which India has adopted. Next, we have continuously expanded our soft power. When we talk about the International Yoga Day, or when we talk about the International Solar Alliance, or when we talk about the South Asian satellite, we have been basically working for the common good. And we have been increasing our soft power in different countries around the world, be it emerging as the voice of Global South, right? Now, what are the challenges to India's construct of strategic autonomy? See, the very first is perception of weakness. See, what many of the international affairs experts say is that if a country aspires to become a power center, or if it wants to become powerful, it has to take a stand on a particular issue. It cannot be ambivalent. It cannot be ambiguous. And therefore, many of these experts have alleged that India has failed to take a stand on important international issues, be it the Russia-Ukraine war, or be it the Israel-Iran conflict, or be it the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, this particular situation has been termed by many of these strategic experts as sitting on the fence approach, that India does not take a position. Now, we have our own reasons, but this is the kind of perception of weakness which many of these strategic thinkers have. Then, fear of becoming a US ally. See, understand, many a times what we have witnessed is that US has consistently narrowed the choices for India. Be it the sanctions imposed on the Iranian oil supplies to India, or be it the threat of sanctions under the CAATSA, countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. And it was said that if India goes with the buying of S-400 Triumph missile defense system, then definitely the America is going to impose sanctions under CAATSA. So it has consistently narrowed the choices. And what it has done is that it has tilted India towards the US. When we talk about greater defense partnerships or greater interactions, be it technology, be it business. So there is a kind of a fear that India is slowly becoming a US ally. It should be rather a partner, not a ally. Then let's talk about the assertive rise of China. See, when we are talking about the rise of China, we are not just talking about the global aspect, or we are not just talking about the regional aspect. We are also talking about the land borders which India shares with China. There have been consistent clashes, skirmishes, be it Galwan, be it Doklam, right? So this situation, what it basically compels India is to have close partnership with the West so that it can counterbalance the rise of China, right? And therefore, we need to come up with more partnerships with the Western countries, primarily the US because of this. Assertion of power, again, very important. See, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific region, especially the Indian Ocean region, what India says is that it is the net security provider. And it says that we are having this policy of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. Now, if it has to become, or if it says that we are a regional security provider, net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, it has to sometimes manifest its naval superiority. And it might lead to the antagonistic relations with different countries around the world, especially China, right? And therefore, what we see is that this particular assertion of power is not good when we talk about the strategic autonomy, because again, India would fall back, or India would have to be dependent upon the Western blocs. Then there's a dependence on developed countries for economic growth. We are critically dependent. See, whether you believe it or not, definitely we are working upon the self-reliance. There's no doubt about that. But when we talk about technology, let's talk about the kind of development we are witnessing in the artificial intelligence. Primarily, it is being in the US or in the China, right? Or let's talk about the other aspects of semiconductor. We have come up with our own indigenous manufacturing bases. But still, when we talk about the technological aspect, when we talk about the investments, we are still dependent upon these countries, right? So this basically in one way or the other affects our stance of strategic autonomy. Now, what should be the way forward when we look at the overall situation, right? So the very first is multi-vector foreign policy approach. What we are trying to say is that India is already interacting with different countries. We need to strengthen, we need to make our partnerships more robust with different countries around the world, be it with Russia, be it with US, be it the other countries, right? And we need to have issue-based cooperation, be it technology, be it investments, be it business, be it space exploration. So we need to have a more robust multi-vector foreign policy approach, creative diplomacy and flexibility. Understand, very, very important. Let's take the case of US or take the case of China. Both these countries are diplomatically very strong. They have very skilled diplomats. They have the presence of these diplomatic people all around the world. What we should do is that India being the emerging power, India being the Vishwaguru, what we have to do is we'll have to invest in the aspects of diplomatic maneuvering. We'll have to make sure that we have skilled diplomats around the world who can basically put forward India's voice, right? Cooperate and compete. We generally talk about the word cooperation, but we should also focus upon competing, because if we'll not compete in this particular world, then we are going to be behind. Let's talk about technology. Let's talk about the artificial intelligence or semiconductors. We need to invest in these technologies and make sure that we are competing with different countries around the world. At the same time, we should also cooperate. Then we have the active engagement with the middle powers. I already told you, we have Japan, we have South Korea, we have Germany. We need to actively engage primarily because these countries are technological powerhouses, right? Be it automobile, be it the space research or other things. Utilizing the multilateral institutions, again very important. When we talk about the South-South cooperation, or India being the voice of Global South, or India advocating the interests of the least developed countries, especially when we talk about the African or the Caribbean countries, what we have to do is we have to give importance to the multilateral institutions. And we did that. During India's presidency of G20, we basically incorporated the African Union in the G20 architecture, right? So that is a kind of thing which is required. That is the kind of approach which is required, especially when we talk about strengthening these multilateral institutions so that countries do not unilaterally impose the kind of verdicts which they want to impose on the other countries. So what we are trying to say is that this particular approach of strategic autonomy, it has evolved with time, and it is primarily because of the India's national interests. We are keeping the national interests of India at the center position. What we have to do is we have to make sure that we have to invest in ourselves diplomatically, militarily and economically so that we are not dependent upon these countries and we can manifest this aspect of strategic autonomy in real terms. If you really want to say that you are strategically autonomous, then you need to invest in your own technology, your economy and your military. That is what we have to do. Let's have a look at one of the main practice question. In an increasingly polarized global order, India's pursuit of strategic autonomy has undergone significant evolution. We are talking about the evolution chronologically, right? In the light of this statement, discuss the challenges and opportunities. So in this particular question, many times we have this particular discussion, how to basically break this question. Now, the very first statement talks about the evolution of India's strategic autonomy. So you'll have to talk about the evolution also. Then you have to talk about the challenges and the opportunities India's principle of strategic autonomy faces and also suggest a way forward. What should be the way forward? Based upon the content discussed, you can easily write a very good question. Please try to write. It's going to be very important for you, especially from the mains perspective. Let's also look at a previous year question of 2019, which shows this particular aspect of strategic autonomy. Because US has never liked this stance of strategic autonomy, as many a times even the US ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, he has said that there is no such thing like strategic autonomy which India practices, right? So let's look at this question. What introduces friction into the ties between India and the US is that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambitions. Explain with suitable examples. Now, why I have given this particular question is to just tell you that how important this particular topic is all about, right? I hope you have understood this. Let's go to the next topic. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know through the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to 6th schedule, devolution or exclusion. So we have a particular Lok Sabha MP who has alleged that the state government in Assam is basically discriminating against the people living in the 6th schedule area in the state of Assam. And this is ultimately eroding the autonomy of the tribal councils functioning under the 6th schedule of the constitution. See, we have a lot of tribal people living across the country. In order to usher in more autonomous governance, we have the 5th schedule area. But there are certain tribal groups in the country, especially when we talk about the northeast area, who have their own unique cultural traits, who have had a more isolationist way of living. In order to give them greater autonomy, we have the 6th schedule area. Now, it has definitely balanced their own indigenous customs and traditions with that of the national integration. It has its own success. Definitely, it has had its own successes. But there are a lot of limitations with respect to the working of the institutions in the 6th schedule areas. So what we're going to do is we'll talk about what are 6th schedule areas, how far they have been able to balance this aspect of cultural preservation with that of the national integration, what have been the successes, what have been the limitations, and what should be the way forward in a very comprehensive manner, part of the Indian Constitution vulnerable sections. Now, when we talk about the 6th schedule, it is basically derived from the sub clause of Article 244 of the Indian Constitution. So if you just look at the Article 244 of the Indian Constitution, the second clause, what the article talks about is the administration of schedule areas and tribal areas. The second clause says that the provisions of 6th schedule shall apply to the administration of the tribal areas in the state of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. So remember, 6 schedule areas, they are basically in these 4 states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. If you were to look at the district councils, so again, first we'll talk about the aim. What is the aim? I've already talked about that we have the unique tribal identity. So in order to have their or give impetus to their own ways of living, to their cultural aspects, and to balance with the national integration, we have given them the autonomy, right? The constitution has provided with the autonomy to these particular areas. Now understand, we have the ADCs, autonomous district councils, or we have the regional councils present in this particular area, which basically are in charge of running or governing these particular tribal areas. Now, if you just look at this particular infographic, you will see in the state of Assam, we have 3 areas. We have North Kachar Hills Autonomous Council, we have the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, we have the Bodoland Territorial Council, right? Let's talk about Meghalaya. So we have Garo Hills ADC, we have Jaintia Hills ADC, we have the other Khasi Hills ADC, right? Now, next aspect is in Mizoram. In Mizoram also we have 3. We have Chakma ADC, we have the Lai ADC, we have Mara ADC, and ultimately we have one in Tripura, which is Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council. So in total, we have 10 areas, right? I hope this is clear. We have 4 districts and 10 areas which are deemed as areas under the 6th schedule. Now, 6th schedule balancing the tribal autonomy with national integration. The very first is it allows for asymmetric federalism. See, what is asymmetric federalism? That we are giving some importance to particular areas, primarily because on the basis of certain factors, maybe because of backwardness, maybe because of other factors. So we are not treating these entities in a similar manner. We are treating them differently because of the kind of sufferings or because of the kind of issues these areas are suffering with, right? So we are giving them more importance. Regional diversity is catered to. We are giving importance to their own culture, their traditions, their way of living, without compromising the unity and integrity of the nation. So what we are trying to focus upon is that you manage your affairs in the way you really want to, or in the way you have been practicing for thousands of years, your own indigenous way of living, right? But we'll have to make sure that you are a part of the nation as a whole, right? So we are also giving importance to the integrity of the nation. Then autonomous governance. See, I already told you that we have these autonomous district councils or the regional councils. They are made in charge. They are the institutions which govern the local matters. For example, land, customs, or other matters, right? General matters, regulating the economic activities in these particular areas. So ultimately understand that this reduces the separatism and regionalism. That is, we are not imposing, we're not having a one-size-fits-all approach. We are not imposing the kind of the framework which the center or the state says to these particular areas. They have their own ways of living, their own ways of governance. What it does is that it reduces this aspect of separatism and regionalism. Next, legal safeguards. It is not mere laws, simple laws made by the legislature. It is the constitution which is basically protecting these tribal laws. So ultimately, it is fostering in the trust among these people. And ultimately, it increases or enhances this aspect of national integration. Then we have judicial functions, again very important. We have the village councils. which are given the authority to adjudicate certain matters. Adjudicate matters with respect to, let's say, the property issues or the marriage or the divorce. So ultimately, the decisions are being taken by these village councils on the basis of their own traditions and customs. It is not a kind of system which is imposed by the judiciary on these institutions, right? So it integrates the traditional dispute resolution mechanism in the overall governance. Then we have financial support with the constitutional oversight. We already know that we have the statutory grants made under Article 275, subclause 1. So ultimately what happens is that we have these grants which are given to these bodies. So on the basis of these grants, what happens is ultimately they have the adequate funds on the basis of which they can run. But you have to understand, it's not a kind of a full independence which they have. There is a kind of supervision which is done by the governor, who is the constitutional head of the state. Now, this ensures that whatever these ADCs or the RCs, regional councils, are doing, it is in line with the national objective, right? So that is what you have to understand. What have been the successes of the 6 schedule areas? The very first is political empowerment, very, very important. We have, in a way, given political empowerment to these people at the grassroots. And who are these people? They are the tribals with their own unique cultural traits, right? Political space has been provided and they have the administrative control over certain areas with respect to the administration. They are basically managing their own resources. They are having, it's fostering the aspect of leadership, right? Local leadership and participation. For example, let's take the case of Meghalaya. So we have these, as I told you, we have these 3 areas, Garo, Khasi and Jantia, right? So ultimately what is happening is that it is giving impetus to these tribal groups managing their own affairs. That is, they're not dependent, or they are not being told by the state government or by the central government that do this. They are managing their resources. They are basically having the interaction. They are governing on the basis of their own traditions and customs. Then safeguarding the tribal land and resources. Ultimately, the very objective is, the most important point with respect to the ADCs and RCs is to protect the tribal land and make sure that non-tribals or the other authorities, they do not basically acquire the land without the due process, right? So that is what you have to understand. It basically prevents the illegal acquisition of the land. For example, we have the Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council, in which the tribal land transfers cannot take place until this particular ADC has given its approval. So without the approval of ADC, no tribal land can be transferred. Then countering the separatist movements and militancy. Now this is but obvious. If you are giving them the autonomy, what it would basically do is it would reduce the separatism. It would make sure that these people carry out their own functioning according to their own traditions and customs, right? And the tribal aspirations, they are basically looked into. They are given importance. For example, let's talk about the Bodo and the Karbi Accords. Now this basically has fostered the stability in the Northeast. Because what the history has told is that there have been continuous insurgent movements, primarily because there was this aspect or approach of central government, the state government, dictating or imposing its policies. Well, ultimately what happened with time, we realized that no, there has to be the autonomy in this particular areas. So therefore, it has definitely reduced these instances of separatism. For example, let's say the Bodoland 6 schedule status and 2020 accord. This has definitely ushered in the economic prospects in this particular area, right? Economic development and reduce alienation. What we are basically trying to focus upon is that since they have their own resources, they are managing their own resources, they are governing the systems according to their own customs and traditions. There are more livelihood opportunities. People can now basically can ensure that there is proper accountability in place. They can ask these leaders, the local leaders, that where are the jobs? And ultimately what we are seeing is that it is leading to more of livelihood options for the local people in these areas according to their own way of living, right? Recognizing and accommodating the tribal aspirations. Preserving of tribal heritage, ultimately very important. The autonomy which has been given through the 6th schedule, it has proved very important when we talk about preserving the tribal customs. Because ultimately it is the customs and the traditions on the basis of which the governance is taking place in these particular areas. We are giving importance to the language which they speak. We're giving importance to the kind of transactions they have in their daily affairs, right? So ultimately, we are giving impetus to their own way of living, what we call as the cultural aspects. What have been the limitations? Very important. Though they have been able to give more autonomy, but still there are a lot of limitations. The very first is financial viability. See, still what we have to understand is that these ADCs, autonomous district councils and the regional councils, they are dependent upon the central or the state transfers. When we talked about Article 275, subclause 1, right, statutory grants. So still they are dependent upon these grants. Now, again, understand, first of all, that these grants are decided, the timing or let's say the quantum of the grants which are to be given to these areas are decided by the government. That's the first thing. Second thing, what you have to understand is that the kind of resources they have, their own resources, it's quite meager in nature. It's not enough to satisfy the developmental aspects of these areas, right? Significant financial resources, they're dependent upon the central and the state government. Next aspect is that of limited autonomy. Still, what we find is that these ADCs, they have limited powers. And it is the state government which basically decides upon the aspects of administration and legislation. Though on paper, though in text, we have these ADCs and the RCs and the 6 schedule provisions, which basically manifest or show us that these areas are completely autonomous. But still what you find is in the context, in the real terms, it is a state government which through its financial devolution and other aspects decides the way of functioning. Then we have conflicts between traditional and modern systems. Very, very important. See, we have the people who are basically having more of the focus upon the traditional customs and traditions. On the other hand, we have people who are basically following the modern systems, and there have been many times confrontation between these modern and traditional aspects. For example, we have had the amendment of the Khasi Social Customs Bill, which many people said that it is trying to discourage the marriage between the Khasi and the other tribal groups. So there was huge protest among the people over there, right? Inequitable representation. What we are talking about is still we have certain sections in the tribal groups who are wielding the political power. It is not a kind of a process. We are not witnessing a process where there is a massive or a mass mobilization. There is no grassroots mobilization. Still we have some of these tribals living in the deep pockets who are really unaware of the ADCs and all these things. So it's because of the lack of awareness. And ultimately what we see is because of the lack of awareness, still we have the marginalization of these certain groups, certain tribal groups. Next, we have discrimination against the non-tribal people. See, I already told you that we have these ADCs deciding upon the land transfers. And the people who are non-tribals living in these particular area, they are not supposed to be given the land, right? They're not supposed to be transferred the land. Ultimately, there's a kind of stereotype which develop against these non-tribals in these areas. For example, in Meghalaya, we have these non-tribals who are called as this particular word. It's Khars, if I'm not wrong, the pronunciation. So what we have to focus upon is we have to understand that still, though we basically had this particular aspect that we are going to increase the autonomy, but still in real terms, there are a lot of limitations. What should be the way forward? Now, when we talk about the way forward, the best thing is to basically incorporate the recommendations of a particular committee. So we had the Zaza committee of 2013, right, which talked about that how we can strengthen the autonomy in these particular areas. The very first is enhancing the power of these autonomous district councils. How? Make sure that you have greater legislative, executive and financial powers, so that they're not dependent upon the state government or the central government, right? They can really emerge as autonomous institutions. Governance and autonomy would be done in a way in which ideally it should be done. It would be based upon their own customs and traditions, right? Institutionalizing the consultative mechanism. So we have to make sure that there has to be effective consultative mechanism. When we are talking about the mechanism, we are basically looking at the central government, the state government, the local government, right? So that ultimately what we usher in a kind of a practice where the central government gives fund on a timely basis. The state government also does on the basis of the needs and aspirations of these tribal groups. There has to be proper collaboration. There has to be proper coordination. Better financial autonomy. ADCs should be given more control over their financial resources. They should be able to generate their own resources, so that own revenues, right? So that they're not dependent upon the central or the state governments. Sustainable economic development and equity, right? Coordination with the other constitutional provisions, again, very, very important. When we are talking about the 6th schedule, we have to also focus upon the other constitutional provisions. We cannot just solely rely on the 6th schedule aspect. We have the interstate councils. Why not we use that? We have the statutory northeastern region councils, right? So we have to use these institutions effectively. We cannot be dependent upon a particular clause, constitutional clause. We have to make sure that there is importance given to all different aspects. Fostering national integration. There has to be the focus upon greater inclusion. Different tribal communities must be given importance. So in many of the areas, what we have seen is that a particular tribal group which is in dominance, it is holding or it is wielding the complete power. Importance is not given to the other smaller tribal groups. So other smaller tribal groups must also be given importance, so that ultimately, on one hand, they preserve their culture, they carry out the governance on the basis of their own culture, their own cultural traits, traditions, and customs. But at the same time, we also give importance to the national integration. That is what the objective is. It would basically enhance the autonomy and strengthen the unity amidst diversity. So what we're trying to say is, see, definitely these areas have helped to usher in more autonomy for these people, right? But still what we find is there are a lot of limitations, primarily when we talk about the finances or when we talk about the other smaller tribal groups living in this particular area. So there has to be equity. We have to give importance to all the tribal groups and make sure that they have their own resources. And again, the central state and these ADCs and the RCs must have a proper collaborative mechanism. That is what you have to understand. Let's take a question. It says, how does the 6th schedule balance tribal autonomy with national integration? Evaluate its success and limitations. 15 marks, 250 words. Please do write a particular answer in this question. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplify section, we have the first topic which talks about the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls in the state of Bihar. Let's talk about the gist of the article. We have Representation of People's Act 1950 and we have Representation of People's Act 1951. RPA 1950 talks about the electoral rolls, that is the names of the voter in that particular list, whereas the RPA 1951 talks about the conduct of the elections. We have the section 21 of RPA 1950. What it says is that the electoral rolls must be continuously revised. Why? Because electoral rolls is based upon the demography. Demography is a dynamic concept. It keeps on changing. So we'll have to adjust the electoral rolls according to the present demography. Now we are having the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls in the state of Bihar. Why? Because the state is going to have its legislative assembly elections in the month of November. What is the concern? We have some people who are in favor of this, that there has to be the revision. Then we have certain people who are not in favor of this. What they are saying is, who are not in favor, that first of all, Aadhaar as a proof, as an ID proof, is not asked in this particular systemic or special intensive revision of the electoral rules. That's the first thing. You're not considering the Aadhaar. So what they're saying is that Aadhaar virtually is used for every purpose, but now you are not considering Aadhaar. Second part is that the window of this particular upgradation of the list, it is just a month. So there is a concern that many might be left out, right? So this is what this particular thing is. Possibly a question in the prelims can talk about or can ask the provisions with respect to RPA 1950, which this article has in a very simple manner provided, right? So the Election Commission has initiated the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls in the Bihar before the general elections for its legislative assembly. Article 324 gives plenary powers to the Election Commission of India, one of the very important articles, provides for the superintendence, direction and control of the preparation of the electoral rolls for the conduct of elections to the parliament. State legislatures shall vest with the Election Commission. We all know that. 324 gives plenary powers to the Election Commission of India. 326 provides that every citizen who is not less than 18 years of age shall be entitled to be registered as a voter. Universal adult franchise. This is what Article 326 talks about. The electoral rolls are prepared by the Election Commission as per the provisions of RPA 1950. Section 16 of the RP Act disqualifies a non-citizen from being enrolled in an electoral roll. Obviously, if you are a non-citizen, if you have acquired the citizenship of some different country, definitely you are not eligible to be a voter. Section 19 requires that a person is not less than 18 years of age, right? Correct. On the qualifying date and is ordinarily resident of the constituency. This is the key word. This is what you have to understand. What the SIR is trying to find, that who are ordinarily resident of this particular area, of a particular constituency. So this word is also at the root of contestation, right? Section 20 of the RP Act provides the meaning of the term ordinarily resident. What it says is, it specifies that a person shall not be deemed to be ordinary resident in a constituency simply because he or she owns or possesses a dwelling house in such a constituency. I have a particular house or a property in certain area. It doesn't mean that I'm an ordinarily resident in that particular area. What Section 20 of the RP Act talks about. However, at the same time, a person temporarily absent from his or her place of residence shall continue to be ordinary resident there. So it is again quite confusing, right? You are saying that a person who has a house would not, doesn't mean that he's an ordinary resident over there. Or if someone is out, temporarily out, it doesn't mean that he's not the ordinary resident. So there is a kind of confusion which is there. Why has an SIR been initiated? Section 21. This is quite important. Of the RPA Act deals with the preparation and revision of the electoral rolls. It authorizes the Election Commission to carry out a special revision of the electoral roll at any time for the reasons to be recorded. The Election Commission has noted that there have been large-scale additions and deletions to the electoral rolls over the last 20 years due to rapid urbanization and migrations. There have been rural to urban migrations, there have been urban to rural migrations, there have been other factors, and because of that, there has been a kind of change in the overall demography, and that has to be incorporated in the electoral rolls. This has increased the possibility of duplicate entries in the roll. The Commission is constitutionally obligated to ensure that only citizens are enrolled in the electoral rolls. Let's say you have a particular person in the rural area, right? So his name was in the list. Now he migrated to some different urban area, let's say Delhi, right? He has been living for quite some time now. Now he also registers himself as a voter in Delhi. So now there's a kind of duplication which is there, which ideally should not be there, right? So in order to basically root out these issues, we have the Election Commission coming out with the rationalization of the electoral rolls. Accordingly, the Election Commission has decided to carry out the SIR for the entire country, starting with Bihar. Now this is important. It would be done for the entire country, but the starting has been made from Bihar. The last such SIR was carried out for Bihar in the year 2003. So it has already been carried out in the year 2003 before. It's not the first time. That is what you have to understand. Since Bihar Assembly elections are due in November, the EC has presently laid down the guidelines for the SIR for Bihar, right? That's what you have to understand. In the present SIR, every elector will have to submit an enumeration form to their respective BLO, booth level officer. For electors registered in the electoral roll as of January 2003, no further documents are required to be submitted. Again, understand what we are trying to say. That those who have already been verified through the SIR which was carried out in 2003, they need not to submit any document, but those who have basically registered after, right? However, the electors registered after January 2003 have to additionally submit documents for establishing the date and place of birth. This is what you have to do. What they have to do. What are the pros and cons? There have been arguments for and arguments against made for the SIR by various stakeholders. The key issues are, what are the key issues? The very first is the process and time required for the entire exercise. SIR in 2003 was carried out in 31 days, exactly 1 month, without technological support. There was no technological support. This time also, the same amount of time will be taken for the exercise with technology. Now we have a lot of technology with us. Moreover, there are more than 1 lakh BLOs, nearly 4 lakh volunteers, and more than 1.5 lakh booth level agents appointed by the political parties to ensure the smooth implementation. So this is the people who are saying in favor that we have a proper machinery. In addition to the manual workers, we also have the technology in place, right? So things are going to be very effective. But what are the counter arguments? Counter arguments against the SIR in the present form state that it is a humongous task which involves the submission of forms by all 8 crore voters. Close to 3 crore voters would be required to submit documents establishing their date and place of birth for themselves and their parents. Almost 3 crore people will have to submit the documents, not just their own documents, but also for their parents. Migrant laborers and students may not be able to submit their enumeration forms because let's say you have migrant workers working in different parts of the country, right? Most of them, they're dependent upon the small livelihood options. So they cannot come back to Bihar and then enumerate their names, right? So it might lead to the deletion of their names also. There can be potential errors in inclusion and exclusion. The exclusion of Aadhaar as a document for registration, again very important. Proponents of this particular revision in the present form say that Aadhaar is neither a proof of date of birth nor a citizenship, which even just look at, pause this video, open your Aadhaar, over there it's written that it's neither a proof of citizenship, right? So again, that is what you have to understand. The Aadhaar card itself carries a disclaimer stating that it can't be used as a proof of citizenship, right? Hence, it is in line with the constitutional and legal requirements. The Aadhaar has been excluded as a valid document. So, for most of the services, you take Aadhaar as a proof. Now you are not taking that. Strange. The list of valid documents include caste certificates, family registers, and land allotment certificates. Proponents against the revision say that Aadhaar has become an omnibus identity card for all the sections of society. Form 6 for the inclusion of new voters. It is the Form 6 which talks about the inclusion of the voters. As per the rules of 1960, requires that the Aadhaar be provided compulsorily. So Form 6 talks about the provision of Aadhaar as a compulsory aspect. Mentioned as a proof of date of birth and place of residence as per Form 6. So Form 6 basically, which talks about the inclusion of voters. On one hand, it is taking Aadhaar as a proof of birth. But once you're talking about the SIR, the revision aspect, you're not considering Aadhaar. Strange. These rules were made by the central government as per the Representation of People's Act. It is only in the SIR guidelines that the EC has added a declaration form to be submitted along with Form 6 with additional documents other than Aadhaar. So it's not just Aadhaar what they want additional documents. Form 6 only wanted Aadhaar, but now you have come with the other documents. So it's a burden on the people. Exclusion of migrants from the electoral roll. For the SIR in its present form, state that the RP Act provides that only the citizens who are ordinarily resident should be included in the electoral roll of the constituency. Migrants who have moved away for a long period of time on account of education or employment would be included in the electoral roll of the constituency of their current residence as per the provisions of the RP Act and the rules, the election rules. However, counter arguments posit that the RP Act provides that person temporarily absent do not cease to be the ordinary resident. There might be a migrant worker who has come from Bihar to Delhi. Here he is not registered as a voter. Right now he is registered as a voter in Bihar. Let's say this particular revision takes place and he is unable to go back and basically give his proof. What would happen? His name would be excluded from that particular list also, right? So he is basically being disenfranchised. This is not correct. Many migrant workers shift to other places within the state or outside the state but return at regular intervals to their place of birth or upbringing. The Election Commission has, as recently as January 2023, has indicated the intention of providing a remote voting facility for such migrant workers subject to technical feasibility. So the Election Commission, the author is trying to tell that for the migrants, the Election Commission is also thinking to bring a particular facility in their place where they are actually residing as of now. What should be the way forward? To provide an analogy, the inclusion, now this is something which is quite nicely written in the article. The inclusion of an ineligible name in the electoral roll is like a guilty person going scot-free, while the exclusion of an eligible voter is akin to one innocent person suffering. So it's again a very good analogy. Both these prospects would be blight on the democracy. Therefore, electoral rolls should be thoroughly checked and verified. What should be done? First, proposed timelines for the completion of such mammoth exercise are stretched. There has to be increase in the timelines so that people get enough time to come back and register as voters. The Election Commission should also ensure adequate safeguards are put in place for the completion of the exercise without the errors. The BLAs, block level agents, should actively participate to prevent the errors. Secondly, exclusion of Aadhaar from the list of valid documents can create issues for many, especially the underprivileged. Most of these underprivileged, for example, they're having or they're taking the benefits from different government schemes, be it the PDS systems or be it the MG and REGA. They have only Aadhaar as a proof, right? Now, if you're excluding the Aadhaar, it's going to be very difficult for these sections of the society. Election Commission should adequately tailor the process during the claims and objection phase to ensure that no eligible citizen is excluded. Finally, the migrant workers should not be removed from the rolls as that can result in significant deletions. Many such migrants have exercised their right to vote in place of their birth, upbringing as per the choice and should continue to do so. There has to be the importance given to the choice of that particular person, right? It is pertinent to note that the amendment of RP Act in 2010, non-resident Indians who have shifted out of the country, even for the long-term account of employment, education or otherwise, are entitled to register and vote in the constituency. This is strange. We have the non-resident Indians who have been there for many years. They are also entitled to vote. They can come back and vote in their own constituency. But why we are doing this for the migrant workers, which most of them are people belonging to the low economic sections. So that should not be done. The issue of duplicate voter IDs for the same persons in different constituencies should be addressed through the Aadhaar seeding. So if you have a particular person who has voting rights in multiple places, one or more places, then that should be rectified and it can be done through the Aadhaar seeding, which the Election Commission has also talked about. So this particular article talks about a lot of initiatives and also gives us the insight with respect to what are the pros and the cons with respect to this particular revision. Let's go to the next topic. Come to the next article. This is a philosophy of care, and this article has been written by none other than the Union Minister for Health and Family Welfare. Now, I have often said that these articles are also quite important because generally once we write the answer, we tend to be critical of the government's policies. But many times you have to also write the successes of the government. And this particular article very beautifully, the Union Minister has articulated that how the central government has tried to change the overall or brought transformation in the overall health setup of the country, health architecture, right? So India's healthcare system has undergone a remarkable transformation over the last 11 years, according to the Union Minister, driven by political will, enhanced funding, commitment to providing affordable, accessible, equitable, and quality healthcare for all. what really is important from your perspective as civil services aspirant is these words: accessible, affordable, equitable, so that you can write these words in your exam, right? In 2014, India faced significant challenges, including gaps in infrastructure, be it at the primary health setup or the secondary or the tertiary, right? Super specialty care, what we call the tertiary healthcare. Trained human resources, when we are talking about the nursing staff, the doctors, the paramedics, availability of medicines and diagnostics, and service quality. Today, the government is driven by the philosophy of comprehensive care, focus upon proactive well-being. There has been a dramatic shift. The National Health Mission, again very important. So we have had the National Rural Health Mission and the National Urban Health Mission. Both were clubbed, and the government came up with the new policies, and this was way back in 2000s, right? So this particular government, the NDA, try to reinvigorate it, give it more strength, try to make it more robust. Is a cornerstone of this revolution, strengthening the health systems, reducing the maternal and child mortality, combating the diseases, and promoting universal access, right? So the beauty of this article is that the Union Minister has also given you the data points, right? That is how, again, I have always told you, there is no point bombarding yourself with data, right? Data is important to add validity to your argument. Whatever you are writing, whatever point you are writing, you add data to it. It is not the data which gives you the marks. It is basically the argument which you are giving supported by a data or an example which gets you the marks, right? So you can use the data which is provided in this particular article. More than 1.77 lakh Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, health and wellness centers, what we call as, are bringing healthcare closer to the communities. These Arogya Mandirs, what we are focusing upon is the PHCs, primary health centers, and the sub-health centers. And platforms like e-Sanjeevani and Telemanas. E-Sanjeevani is basically teleconsultation. Telemanas is also the same thing, but with respect to the mental health aspect. Have democratized the access to specialist care. Focused interventions under NSM have led to improvements in the maternal and child health indicators, according to UN Maternal Mortality Estimation Interagency Group Report. So it's a UN group report. Definitely you can cite in the examination. India has seen 86% decline in the maternal mortality rate, nearly double the global average decline of 48%. Infant mortality has declined by 73% against the global decline of 58%. Many times a question is asked that how to basically write these, how to remember these data points. The best way is to learn them graphically. So what you can do is you can just make a graph here, talk about the percentage decline, right? And here you can talk about the 86%, and the next data was with respect to the global average was 48%, right? 48%. Now this is with respect to the maternal mortality rate, right? Next aspect can be with respect to the infant mortality rate. It has been 73%, and the global average has been the 58%. And this can be termed for the infant mortality rate. That is how you can very well in the exam showcase to the examiner that, and this you can say source has been the United Nations. So use the data forms in such a manner. The very objective of this particular session is to provide you not just the knowledge, but also how to basically use or make use, effective use of the information which is there in the article, right? The next aspect is, as a burden of non-communicable disease is increasing. For example, we have the cardiac disease. We have been seeing that many of the young people have succumbed because of the cardiac arrests. Or let's talk about the blood pressure, diabetes. So there has been increasing instances. More than 2/3 of the total mortality in the country, it's because of the non-communicable diseases. Preventive care has also been a focus. Screening for oral, breast and cervical cancer is being monitored, provided by the Ayushman Arogya Mandirs. The universal immunization program continues to be strengthened. 6 new vaccines have been introduced since 2014, with 5.46 crore children and 1.32 crore pregnant women vaccinated under the mission Indradhanush. Not really important to memorize the data, but just have a rough outlook. We have leveraged the latest technology to build the UWin portal. We all know that it was in the COVID times that this particular portal proved to be very efficient when we talk about the aspects of distribution of the vaccines, right? Digitize the vaccination services, recording 10.68 crore beneficiaries, administering almost 42.75 crore doses by May 2025. India declared, now again very important information from the perspective of prelims, was declared polio-free in 2014. Eliminated maternal and neonatal tetanus in 2015 and trachoma in 2024. Malaria cases and deaths were dropped by over 80% between 2015 and 2023. We have reached the Kala-Azar elimination. It's visceral leishmaniasis, right? Again, Kala-Azar is caused by a protozoa. That is what you have to understand. The tuberculosis incidence have reduced by 17.7% and mortality by 21% as confirmed by the WHO. So definitely again more important data when you can which you can cite in the examination supported by the WHO. The missing TB cases have dropped from 15 lakhs in 2015 to 1.2 lakh. What are missing TB cases? Those people who are suffering from TB but who are not aware or who are not diagnosed. Those cases are also important because it can also lead to the spread to other people, right? So these are missing TB cases. Healthcare financing has also improved. Government health expenditure as a share of the GDP has increased from 1.13% to 1.84% in 2022. So you can also depict this particular data from 1.1% to 1% of GDP. Health expenditure, right? This was in 2014 and this was in 2022. That is how you can basically talk about we have 1.13 and we have 1.84%, right? So that is how you can also reflect that what has been the stance or the spending with respect to the government in the healthcare aspect. While the out-of-pocket expenditure, that is the expenditure borne solely by the individual, has dropped from 62.6% to 39.4%, right? Free Drugs and Diagnostic Services Initiative has enhanced the affordability and accessibility with laboratory services available in 36 states and union territories. Pradhan Mantri National Dialysis Program has benefited more than 28 lakh patients, saving 8,725 crores in out-of-pocket expenditure. So here the government is taking the responsibility. That is one of the core aspects of a welfare state. You can also cite this as an example of directive principles, right? Like the National Ambulance Services and Mobile Medical Units have extended these services in the remote areas. Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission, PMABHIM, was launched in 2021. Key initiatives include the establishment of 18,000 Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, 602 critical care units, and 730 district integrated public health labs. The NHM has engaged 5.23 lakh additional health workers, including 1.18 lakh community health officers. No need to memorize this particular data, but keep a track of government spending on the health, out-of-pocket expenditure reduction, and also we have the maternal mortality rate and the IMR. Keep a track of that. So you're going to have a look. We have the National Health Mission. It was launched in 2013. We had the NRHM being launched in 2005, NUHM in 2013. Again, focuses upon different aspects on the urban as well as rural. We have the ASHAs, accredited social health activists, Janani Suraksha Yojana, Rashtriya Bal Suraksha Karyakram, Kayakalp, and mobile medical units as a part of this. Then we have Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, what we call as health and wellness centers. We have the reinvigoration or the revamping of the PHCs and sub-health centers, now branded as Ayushman Arogya Mandirs. Then we have eSanjeevani, focus upon the telemedicine platform, right? Has two parts, eSanjeevani OPD and eSanjeevani AB HWC. Then we have Telemanas, again for the mental health aspect. You can just have a look. Universal immunization program, again free vaccines against preventable diseases to all the children and pregnant women. Then we have Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission. Pradhan Mantri Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana, now it is known as Health Infrastructure Mission. Strengthening the critical care hospitals and public health labs, creating integrated public health labs for better diagnostics, expanding the disease surveillance, biosecurity preparedness, and IT-enabled platforms, infusing the digital technology in the overall healthcare setup. These are the important schemes. You can have a glance. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the National Commission for Minorities and National Commission for the Minority Educational Institutions. Very, very important topic. Possibly a question in the prelims can come, and in fact also in the mains. Now we have the National Commission for Minorities, which acts as the watchdog for promoting or protecting the interests of the minorities in the country. In addition, we have the National Commission for the Minority Educational Institutions, which does the same thing with respect to the minority educational institutions. But what we have been seeing is that the government has not appointed the important positions in these commissions for a long period now. And this is affecting the effectiveness of these institutions, right? The National Commission for Minorities, set up with a vision to safeguard and protect the interests of the minority communities in India, is awaiting the appointment of head and members since the retirement in April of its previous chairperson and member Iqbal Singh Lalpura. 5 members of the commission, including the chairperson, have retired since December 24, with no new appointments so far. The NCM, and this is how the questions are framed from the newspaper, and that is how you'll have to utilize the newspaper. Look, every information is given here. The NCM, which works under the Ministry of Minority Affairs, so under whose jurisdiction it works, Ministry of Minority Affairs, has quasi-judicial powers. So it's a quasi-judicial body having some judicial powers also, should have 7 members. How many members are there? 7 members, including the chairperson, vice chairperson. The National Commission of Minorities Act 1992 mandates the appointment of 1 member from each of the 6 minority communities: Buddhist, Muslim, Christians, Sikh, Parsis, and Jains. So it's a statutory body because you have the Act of the Parliament and you have 6 communities which are represented in this particular body. This is not the first time that there has been a delay in filling the vacancies of the NCM. In 2017, the commission remained without a chairperson and several members for months. In 2021, we had the judiciary which had to intervene. The Delhi High Court asked the union government to fill the vacant post in the National Commission for Minorities. I never fully subscribe to the utility of these bodies, said former NCM chairperson Tahir Mahmood. Now, why I have highlighted this part is, in the PSR, for those of you who are having PSR as an optional, we have the IGP section, Indian Government and Politics. Over there, you need to quote the scholars. So we have this particular, let's say if a question comes with respect to the National Commission for Minorities, you can quote this person's view because he has been the former chairperson. The book is Minorities, Commissions, Minor Role in Major Affairs, right? Terming, and we have the other person who said, has termed the NCM as a showpiece, stopgap placement for a faithful politicians, and a post-retirement center for committed bureaucrats. Okay, positions in the commissions have long been occupied by people with connections to the ruling parties, a formal NCM member said. The delayed appointment at the NCM has impacted the National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions, another important body. We often give importance to NCM, but not this particular body. Possibly a question in the prelims can come. The National Commission for the Minority Educational Institutions, a quasi-judicial body. Again, it's a quasi-judicial body that aims to safeguard the educational rights of minorities in the country. The NCMEI is also advisory body to the Union Government on minority educational institutions. The NCMEI, which works under the Ministry of Education, should have 3 members and a chairperson of at least the rank of a retired judge from a high court. The NCMEI has been functioning with a single working member, Shahid Akhtar, for about 2 years. Not a priority. John Dayal, a human rights activist and a former member of the National Integration Council. Do read about this, important. National Integration Council, please do read about this. The long delay in the appointment of the commission with the chairperson and the members clearly shows the welfare of the religious minorities is not on the list of the government, right? Absence of these commissions is gravely felt at a time when hate speech and hate crime are at their peak. This is what the human rights activists are saying. So I have taken these snippets from the website itself, very credible data. We have the Ministry of Minority Affairs, National Commission for Minorities was set up as a statutory body with the enactment of the National Commission for Minorities Act 1992 by the Parliament. It extends to whole of India. The act was enforced. From this, no need to remember. Provide for a vice chairperson in the commission, right? Stands after the amendment in 1995. The commission now consists of chairperson, vice chairperson, 5 members, out of which 5 members, including the chairperson, shall be from the notified religious minority communities, right? So you can just have a look. We have who are the minorities. We have the Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Parsis, and Jains. As per Section 9, Subclause 1 of the National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992, the Commission is mandated to perform the following functions. So we have the first function: evaluate the progress of the development of the minorities which has taken place in the country, monitor the working of the safeguards provided in the Constitution or any law passed by the Parliament, statutory right, what you can say, make recommendations for the effective implementation of the safeguards for the protection of the minorities, look into specific complaints, specific grievances regarding the deprivation of rights and safeguards of the minorities, cause studies to be undertaken in the problems arising with respect to the discrimination against minorities. Then we have conduct studies, research, analysis, suggest appropriate measures. Then we have make periodical special reports to the central government, any other matter which may be referred to by the central government. The commission, while performing of the functions listed in this, has all the powers of a civil court. That is what it gives a quasi-judicial function, architecture. Summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person, requiring the discovery and production of any document, receiving evidence, requisitioning any public record, issuing commissions for the examination of witness, any other matter which may be prescribed. So it's a quasi-judicial body. Let's talk about this. National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions. Article 30, Subclause 1 of the Constitution provides for linguistic and religious minorities a fundamental right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. We know it's a fundamental right. National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions Bill 2004 was passed by both the houses, received the assent of the President. It came on the statute book as National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions Act of 2004. The particular act has been enacted. What is the basis? Know that. to safeguard the educational rights of the minorities enshrined in Article 30, Subclause 1 of the Constitution. The Commission is a quasi-judicial body. Again, quasi-judicial, has the judicial functions, can summon any public official, can call for any records, has been endowed with the powers of a civil court for the purpose of discharging its functions. The Commission has three main roles, namely adjudicatory, advisory, and recommendatory. That is what you have to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to a statement made by the Chief Justice of India talking about the importance of the mother tongue. So we already know, amid the kind of controversies we are having with respect to the kind of language which has to be spoken, we know that people are imposing a particular language on the other. So amid that, we have the Chief Justice of India who has said that mother tongue plays a very important role when we talk about the cognitive development of the children. Chief Justice of India on Sunday stated that studying in one's mother tongue enhances the conceptual understanding and instills strong values of life. As he reminisced, he thought about his student days at a Marathi medium school in Mumbai. It is a good moment to read about or to have a glance through the constitutional articles which are related to the language. So let's talk about this. Part 17 of the Constitution deal with the official languages, Article 343 to 351. 343, Subclause 1. It says, official language of the Union shall be Hindi in Devanagari script. The script is Devanagari. The form of numerals to be used for the official purpose of the Union shall be International Form of Indian numerals. Article 343, Subclause 2 talks about for 15 years from the commencement of the Constitution, English language shall continue to be used for all the official purpose of the Union for which it was being used immediately before the commencement of the Constitution. However, the President may authorize the use of Hindi language in addition to the English language for any of the official purpose. So we have English in addition to the Hindi also, right, as official language. 344, Official Language Commission to be considered by the President. 345, the legislature of a state can adopt any one or more languages in the use in the state or Hindi as a language to be used for any official purpose of the state. 46, official language for communication between one state and another or between a state and the Union talks about that. 347, President can direct any language that shall also be officially recognized throughout the state or any part of the state. So it gives the power to the President to basically recognize that particular language. 348, Subclause 1, until the Parliament may by law provides, English should be used in the following areas of all the proceedings of the Supreme Court. In every High Court, the authoritative text of the bills and ordinances shall be in the English language. 348, Subclause 2, the governor of a state, with the previous consent of the President, authorizes the use of Hindi language or any other language to be used for official purposes of the state in the proceedings of the High Court having its principal seat in that state. However, this is important. The judgment, decrees and other orders of the High Court must be in English only. They can communicate, they can have their transactions, they can talk or communicate in their own language which has been given duly assent by the governor, also the President. But what you have to understand, the judgment would only be in English. 348, Subclause 3, a state legislature can prescribe the use of any language other than English with respect to bills, acts, ordinances. However, a translation of the same in the English language is to be published. Translation in English has to be there. Special directives. Here we talk about the importance of the mother tongue. Article 350, language to be used in representation for redress of grievance. 350, capital A, facilities for instructions in mother tongue at the primary stage. That is important. 350, capital A, right? So it gives impetus to the use of mother tongue, especially when we talk about the early stage of living, when we talk about the early childhood care and education, which has also been highlighted in the national education policy. That is what you have to understand. 350, capital B, Subclause 1, Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities, so to promote and protect the interests of the linguistic minorities. 351, Directive for the Development of Hindi Language. So again, you can just have a glance so that you know where to use these articles in the mains answer, right? Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to the European Union's plan of starting with carbon credit mechanism. Let's have a gist of the article. See, EU has set a target for itself by the year 2040, and the target is by the year 2040. It is basically going to cut its net emission by 90% from 1990 levels, right? That is a target it has set. So previously, now it is but obvious that if you have to work upon the target, you'll have to come with the adaptation and mitigation mechanism. So initially, all the mechanisms were restricted to the countries of the EU. What they said that you have to basically come up with more technologically sound products and services and mechanism so that you can reduce the overall pollution. Now, understand, we have many of these countries who are already witnessing a kind of a downgrading when we talk about the economic production, right? So the production is weakening in these countries. Now, if impose these conditions, obviously it would affect the efficiency and production of these countries, right? So therefore, many of the countries in the EU, for example, Germany and other countries, they said that there has to be in place a softer target, right? Do not impose a kind of a hard target on us, which basically compromises the efficiency of our industries. So what the European Union said was that, so let's start with the carbon credit mechanism. What we are going to do is, the process is that let's say we have the European Union, right? Let's say we have European Union as A. Now, instead of working upon itself, reducing its total net emissions, what it would do is, it would basically give money to a country B, most probably a developing country, right? Or a least developing country, so that it can adopt, this particular country can adopt more efficient mechanisms and technologies in place, right? So European Union would itself not work upon that, right? It would basically give money to a country B, which is a least developed country or a developing country, and this particular country would then give back carbon credits, which can then be used as a kind of something compensating its targets, right? So carbon credits are going to be used by the European Union so as to show to the world that yes, we have achieved our targets. So what it is trying, and many of the environmentalists, they are not happy with that. They're saying that why you are now dependent upon the other countries, why you are themselves, or why you're not yourselves investing money and sound technological innovations in your own economy. You're not doing that. You are basically investing in different countries and asking other countries to follow. Ultimately, you are not making or having sound environmental policies for the European Union itself. So there are contradictory claims, but that is what the concept of carbon credit is all about. So we have people who are in favor of that, and we have people who are also against that. The European Commission has proposed an EU climate target for 2040 that allows countries to count carbon credits bought from the developing nations towards the EU goal for the first time. What are the carbon credits? Carbon credits are offsets, involve funding projects that reduce the CO2 emissions abroad in place of cuts to your own greenhouse gas emissions. So you're not cutting down your own emissions. You're basically investing in some other areas, right? Examples include forest restoration in Brazil or converting a city's petrol buses to electric. The buyer counts the credits for those emissions reductions towards the climate goal, and the seller gets the finance for their green projects. Proponents say that the system generates much needed funding for the CO2 cutting efforts in the developing nations and lets the countries work together to cut the emissions, right? So what it is basically doing is, the proponents of carbon credit, that it is giving enough space for us to basically industrialize, to make our products more efficient, and it is also helping other countries to come up with their own better technologies in place so that they can also reduce the overall pollution. However, the reputation of CO2 credits has been dented by a string of scandals in which credit generating projects failed to deliver the climate benefits they claimed. So initially they proposed that we are going to deliver these many credits, but ultimately they failed, right? They were not able to bring those things in ground realities. So there have been a lot of concerns. The European Commission's proposed allowing up to 3 percentage points of EU's 2040 target to cut the net emissions by 90% from 1990 levels. So 3% of this target can be met through the carbon credits, which the recent changes have basically allowed the European Union to do so. To be covered by carbon credits brought from other countries, the EU's existing climate targets require countries to meet the goals entirely by cutting the emissions at home. Tumultuous geopolitics and the economic woes of European industries have since stoked the political pushback, with governments in Germany to Poland demanding a softer target. So again, there is a softer demand. There are the kind of stance taken by US with respect to the imports from the EU, or the exports from the America to the EU. So ultimately what we are seeing is, it's a tough economic situation, and the European Union countries, if they really want to compete with the countries around the world, they'll have to make sure that these restrictions are not so rigid that they ultimately affect the efficiency and productivity of their own industries. Therefore, there has to be a soft target in a way that we are allowing a kind of carbon credit mechanism so that the European Union does not basically mandate its own countries. Rather, we can have the carbon credit mechanism, and that can compensate for the greenhouse gas emission cuts. In response, the Commission said that it would add flexibilities and landed on a carbon credit as a way to retain the 90% emission cutting goal while reducing the domestic steps. What are the risks? The EU plan, welcomed by the countries and by carbon credit project developers as a boost for climate finance, obviously, because see, these countries are rich countries. They have a lot of sources with them. So we have these project developers of the carbon credits. They are much happier. They're happy that now these countries would definitely give them money, and then they can invest in their own countries. But environmental campaigners said that EU was shrinking the domestic CO2 cutting efforts and warned against relying on cheap, low-value credits. The EU's climate science advisors had also opposed buying credits under the 2040 target, which they said would divert money from investments in local clean industries. So what these scientists have said is that why you're not investing in EU itself, but that is something which is cost intensive task, and that would affect the overall prices of the commodities produced by the European industries. So therefore it is not something which should be done as said by different countries in EU, and therefore they have gone with the carbon credit aspect, and they would be investing in other countries and buying the carbon credits. EU banned the international credits from its own carbon market after a flood of cheap credits with weak environmental benefits contributed to a carbon price crash. To try to address this risk, the Commission said that it would buy the credits in line with the rules for trading carbon credits which the UN is developing. So previously they tried it, but again there was a kind of scandal which was involved and it could not deliver the exact results. Now they're saying that we are going to follow the rules set by the United Nations with respect to the carbon credits. How much will it cost? The EU doesn't know. Carbon credits prices today can be as low as few dollars per ton of CO2 up to more than 100 US dollars depending upon the project. The EU emissions record suggests that the bloc would need to buy at least 140 million tons of CO2 emissions to cover the 3% of the 240 target. Now this is almost equivalent to the emissions of the country of Netherlands, total emissions per year. That is what you have to understand. The gist is that previously they were not having this aspect of carbon credits, but the countries in the EU, they basically protested. They said that we need to have that space, we need to focus upon the productivity and efficiency, so do not basically impose these restrictions on us, rather allow us having the carbon credit mechanism, and that is what up to 3% the EU has allowed to do so, right? I hope this is clear. That's all for today. I hope this session was really helpful for you. All the very best. Thank you so much.